Hi, everybody, and welcome to Basement Chronicles, the Sunday interview. My guest today is Lillah Penddah. And you guys, I have her off screen now. She's here, and I'm going to now just introduce her and bring her on. She has such a story. Not only is she the host of The Conversation is the Relationship, and I'm just going to drop that link in the chat right now. But Lillah just has such a story. I was listening to the last episode of her podcast, which is so poignant. It is infuriating for so many reasons, but it's not all she is. I met Lillah many years ago. I think during COVID we met and connected on so many levels. And both of our businesses and our paths have taken distinct journeys, trajectories. Sometimes they've intertwined, sometimes they have not. But when I tell you that you are in for an interesting interview, especially if you are from the Black community here in Edmonton, you want to stick around, you want to call a friend to be part of this interview because it does affect all of us, some of what we're going to be talking about. So without any further ado, I am going to bring on Lillah Penddah. Hey, Lillah, how are you?
Hello, Miss Lisa. How are you?
I'm good. Lisa and Lillah are in the house. Oh my goodness. I have so much to say. Let's begin with the obvious question. Tell us about yourself.
All right. So I'm Lillah Penddah. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called AfroFacts, where we create educational tools played as games, workshops, and webinars to help people increase their awareness with respect to Canadian Black history and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm a part-time facilitator for Edmonton Unlimited, facilitating some of their various entrepreneurship programs that are free that support entrepreneurship here in Edmonton. I'm also a public speaker in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space. And I am currently the host of The Conversation is the Relationship podcast.
Lovely. I want to go into your last episode of the conversation is the relationship, but can we start perhaps with Afrofacts? Because
Yeah.
I remember distinctly walking with you. Remember when we used to take
Oh,
these walks
yes.
during COVID?
Yeah, I do.
And Lyle, I have to tell you, like you needed to be how many feet apart? Do you remember that? Like
Oh
you.
yes, and I was very serious about it.
Oh my
I
goodness.
was serious. I'm like, no, I'm a rule follower.
What? Like to the point was, you know what? I'm just here because I like you. Like you're a nice person. But she was so stringent about the rules. And you'll discover that when you listen to her podcast and the things that she does. But I think one of the most interesting things about you was how you came to develop your game,
Yeah.
Afrofacts. I remember bringing you when I was the chair of the
Yes.
Non-Academic Staff Association EDI committee. You did that game one time with our group, and it was so enlightening. So tell us about the genesis of that game.
All right. So
Mhm.
I've been born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I did not grow up around people that look like me. My friends
Let's
are
stop right there. Did you? Let's just let that sink right there, okay?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Black girl didn't grow around people, didn't grow up around people who look like her. So yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So the only other Black people I knew were my family. And most often I was one of like five or less Black kids in a school, whether it be elementary, junior high, or high school. So my friends were predominantly white. In later years, I would make more Asian friends, but I've been the only Black person steadfast in the group for over 20 years. And so when I finished university, I really came to realize that I hadn't learned anything about Black history. And I would often see the commercials on TV every Black History Month, but they were American based commercials. So I really started to think, why have I not learned anything? And what a miss. I'm Black. I should know something. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to educate myself and my friends, and we're just going to figure this out. I need to bring this education not only to myself, but to the people I cared about. And one thing that I had to really figure out is how do I get people that are not Black to care about Black history? So I
Oh,
actually started out with an oversized laptop, a piece of paper with about 20 questions, and three friends. We went to my friend's house and I sat them directly across from me. And I thought I had picked the easiest of questions. So I had a question about Oprah, Whitney Houston, Prince. I'm thinking this is low level trivia,
low
pop
hanging
culture.
fruit.
And I was shocked and dismayed to find out they did not know anything. And so instantly, within about 15 minutes, I'm like, this is not the way. This is not the way. Because I was getting frustrated and they clearly did not know. And so I had to really sit back, revamp, reflect on it, and think about how can I get them to learn something that they don't inherently have an attachment to, and how can I make it fun for them so it's not just me talking at them. And so over a 10-year period, using my friends as my market testing group, I would develop a game. So I would create a new version every year. We would play it because I turned it into an annual event. I really took it to the top of the mountain as a combination of bribery, but also making it such a good time that they would want to come, that they wouldn't not want to participate. And so we used to have game nights all the time. So I'm like, you know what? Let me take my favorite pieces of the games that we play and kind of create this hybrid, bringing those pieces together. And so every year we would play the game and I'd get their feedback and then I'd create a new version the following year. In turning it to an annual event, I would have my mom make a traditional African meal. My friends would come over, I'd feed them, there'd be prizes, we'd play the game. And what was lovely to see is that from year to year, you could see that they started to retain the knowledge. It would also be their feedback that actually would inspire me to create the study guide, because they did come to me one year and said, we need help. We need to make a study
Where are
guide.
you supposed to get this information from?
Exactly.
Right.
So then it turned into me creating the study guide. I would give them the study guide at the beginning of February, and then we would play the game at the end of the month. So they had like 28 days to study. But to see people that weren't Black, that didn't inherently have a necessarily deep need to care, make space for me to really show up and show out in this space is something that I'll forever be grateful for. And I really attribute that to them and the allyship that they showed me.
My goodness. A couple of things stand out for me already.
Yeah.
You know how you are just super organized
Yes.
and like you hear it just going through the podcasts, especially that last episode that we're going to come to and focus upon. And look at how that level of organization has
Mhm.
led to something so tangible and
Mhm.
sustaining. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Honestly, while you were speaking, I was like, I wonder how many Black people would do well with that game. Have you ever tested it on Black audiences as well?
So, as luck would have it, I never got feedback from Black people until probably about 4 years ago.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I created the game over a 10-year period. Then there was a 7-year break. And then I brought it back once BLM really started ramping up in
Mhm.
2020. And that was when I started to get feedback from Black people. So for me, it wasn't something I had deeply thought about just because they weren't in my vicinity. I didn't have access. And therefore, I'm like, I just focused on what I had access to, being my own friend group. But when I first got feedback, it was in regards to the name of the game, because the name of the game was originally called Black Facts, which really, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. It's facts about Black people. And
Right.
so I used that name for 10 years and I was really quite married to it. And then the first time I actually facilitated for the Africa Center, one of the people there said, have you given any thought to maybe considering changing the name? And I'm like, no. But again, this is the first time I'm getting any Black
Feedback.
perspective.
Feedback. Yeah.
And they raised a really great point. They're like, you know what? In Africa, we don't refer to ourselves as Black.
Oh
And,
my
and I
goodness.
would have no idea. Like, I went to Africa when I was 2 years old. So I clearly remember nothing. I'm not around Black people. I'm not steeped in Black culture. So I don't have any reference base for this information. So I didn't know that. I had no idea. But in Africa, they don't refer to themselves as Black because they're the majority there. And so he's
Right.
like, because of that, there's a lot of stigma and association around the use of the word Black, because who chose the color Black? And often when you hear Black referenced in literature, it's usually in a negative or
Negative.
associated with evil. And so that was kind of the use of the name in, or the use of the word in the name of my game was unintentionally perpetuating that association with the name. And so I had to sit and really think about that because that was something I didn't know. It was the first time
Mhm.
I was hearing it. And, as an entrepreneur, you will often receive feedback. Now, feedback is neutral. You get to decide the importance you place on it.
Mhm.
And so for me, as much as I was tied to the name that I had previously had, this was an opportunity for me to expand my own perspective and think about I need to be in front of the curve of change. I need to be on the right side of history. So let me think about this. And so I spent quite a bit of time trying to come up with a new
Yeah,
name.
after
I had
17
also,
years, right? After
yes,
17
and
years of the game.
I had also um, tried to trademark Black Facts, and it was far too general to do that. I needed a more specific name, and that is what brought Afro Facts to the table. Because really, what we're talking about is the history of people of African descent. So, regardless of where the Black person is in the world, you know that their ancestral history will go back to Africa in some fashion. Hence, calling it Afro Facts instead.
And do you think it has been better received, or have you tested it even, whether it's been better received since changing it to Afrofax?
Honestly, I feel like at this point, most people know it as Afrofax. The people that really know it as Black Facts are my friends. And so they'll still call it Black Facts to me from time to time, but I obviously know what they're referring to. But the public really has only ever known it as Afrofax. And
Right.
what's great is that really spurred the design of my logo, the additional work that I do. And so it was a beautiful, natural progression of the business and the game itself.
Wow, that is amazing. And while you were speaking, I was reflecting on the different meanings that we have
Mhm.
for just the nuances of black.
Yeah.
I gave the story. I'm not sure if I did it here. I gave the story of when I first had my first office job here in Edmonton, and I was the only black person in the office
Yeah.
at the time, and just this white girl wanted to kind of connect, but didn't want to use the word black, and
Mm.
ended up calling me, who's Afro-Caribbean. She said, yeah, I know lots of African American people. That was her way of, she thought, getting away from the whole
Mhm.
black thing. But since then, I did have the conversation with her. I'm not African American.
Mhm.
Black is fine.
Oof.
Like, it's okay. And
Yes.
since becoming a coach, one of the things that I've questioned, interrogated, is how much can we change the perception? It's not that the black is bad, it's the perception
Yeah.
around it that really needs some work, in terms of every time you use it, you can reinforce a certain thing that you want people to know about being black, that it can be similar to anything else, or it can just simply be neutral, it can
Mhm.
just be human. But I
Yeah.
guess, do you think that's wishful thinking, to think we'll get
You know
ever
what's
get
funny?
to?
When
Yeah.
he when I got that piece of information about the game, I actually went back to my study guide and I'm like, okay, let me take out the references to black and maybe use African Canadian or African American. That was almost impossible. It
Yeah,
didn't quite work
exactly.
because my study guide comes from various pieces of literature,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's not as simple as being like, I'm not going to use the word anymore. It's the word has been socialized very deeply. It's accepted in the world. And so it is much more difficult to be like, well, we're going to change the meaning of this word, or we're going to not use it, or we're going to take it out. It's too deeply ingrained into society to do that. So it becomes more of a matter of helping people understand the origin, the also some of the underlying microaggressiveness within it,
Yeah.
the when it came into existence in the first place, because there's colors on a spectrum. Even when you look at different minority groups, you've got red associated with indigenous, you've got yellow associated with Asian,
Asian.
you've got
Yeah.
brown associated with East Indian. It's like, who is making these color decisions? Because no one's actually the color that you're saying they are.
Yeah,
Like, I am a
exactly.
chocolatey brown, I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily
Yeah. You know.
right? But it's the connotation in society. White being pure, being associated with God, heaven, angels. Black being associated with like the black hole, darkness, bad. And so I think it's more about bringing people's level of awareness to that, even though they're still using the word in the world, just helping them recognize the origin and the problems surrounding the origin. However, again, as you said, it comes down to personal preference. You advise the girl that, hey, it's
Yeah.
okay, you can use that
Yeah.
term. And that's really what it's about, is not just assuming a person's going to be okay with what you choose to use for in reference to them, because you can go to some places in America where there's a very distinct distinction between using black and African.
Yeah.
And I just learned this recently. And so I'm really intrigued to speak to someone that really fleshes that out for me. But in Chicago, there's a really big difference being known as African and being known as black.
Because
And
is
that's
it
not
that
something I would,
African? Oh, is that African is from the continent? Is that how they
yes,
look at it?
Africans from the continent.
Yeah.
That people don't like being referenced incorrectly, which to me, I don't see it, because I'm like, I am African Canadian and I am also Black. To me, it's somewhat interchangeable,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
there's a difference there. And so it's
Yeah.
really interesting to see, depending on where you are positioned, the words carry slightly different meanings. And it's more the job of us, where we go, that we become aware of that and then not assume that everybody likes to be called the same thing.
Yeah.
It's more of asking them, how would you like me to reference you? And that's a lovely sign of respect and showing that you care enough to find out before making a mistake. But
Yeah.
even then, if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. They will let you know,
Oh
and
yeah.
then you won't make that mistake again.
Again, and yeah, and then you have to be that person who's willing to accept that, I made a mistake and
Yes.
this is how this person would prefer it. Just one last point before we move on to other things. And it's even a very interesting time for me to be part of the Afro Canadian community right now,
Hmm.
having an Afro Caribbean background,
Yeah.
because even within our regions, African as opposed to Black, there are different connotations. I
Yes.
know people from the Caribbean who will actually resent being called African and would
Mm.
prefer Black. And I
Mm.
don't know that these nuances ever get thrashed out, aired out enough for us to kind of interrogate and perhaps take steps to influence them in a different direction. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of colorism in the Caribbean as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
African is closest, as far as some people are concerned, to Black, and then you have the different shades that also go to the other end of the continuum. So,
Yeah.
like somebody who's straddling both cultures, the regions, trying to bring Black people together, has to be cognizant of what it means in each of the territories and regions. That it's very interesting. It's a lovely time to be part of Black Canada, I must say. It is.
Learning a lot.
Definitely, definitely. So let's move on now. I think this next part will perhaps take up a big chunk of what we want to talk about.
Okay.
When we signed on, the first thing I said to you is that I am just outraged. Like your last podcast. Let's go
Yes.
there, Lila. Lila, for those of you who are listening, wherever you are listening from, not only is she podcast host and the Afrofax founder and a facilitator and all of those things, she has now added to that, I guess, all of the checks on in your repertoire, having experienced a very negative, just not being treated well in the Canadian medical system.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you, like, talk about it. And you guys, I put the link for the conversation is the relationship, that podcast. I put the link right here. So please go subscribe to her podcast. I'm all about empowering us, and this one's good. This one, when I heard it, I was like, trust Lila to be able to go in these places. Okay. I listened to a couple episodes before that one,
Yeah.
and I found them so transparent. And
Thank
it
you.
could only be somebody who straddled so many different milieus, I guess, that was able to bring out all of these things. Thank you for that, first of all. Right?
Thank you so much. You honor me with your
Awesome.
kind words. You just never know with these things. You like, let me put it out and see. And so it's been
Exactly.
amazing to be receiving positive feedback. So I actually experienced my first real deep instance of racial discrimination at the hands of the medical system, specifically pertaining to seeking treatment for uterine fibroids, which is something that is common in women of African descent, and even more specifically common in women of West African descent. So my parents emigrated from Ghana, so I am technically Ghanaian. And again, I did not know this. I
Mm.
didn't get any of this information from the doctor.
That
I
it
got
was
this
that it was
information.
prevalent amongst people from West Africa.
Yes, I
Yeah.
got my information from the Real Housewives of Atlanta, because it's a series of Black women. And then I also got information from the CEO and president of the African Canadian Civic Engagement Council, Dunia Nur. She was the one that gave me, oh, yeah, did you know it's even more common in West African women? I'm like,
Oh
how
my
would I know that?
goodness.
Nobody's giving me any real information to begin with. So it would be about a 20-year struggle, to be honest, and trials, tribulations, trauma, doctors not believing me, doctors acting like I was doing something inappropriate by questioning them when it came to them saying, no, we're not going to do test, or we're going to do this test over that test. And it's been harrowing. It really has been harrowing because for the audience, uterine fibroids, when you have them, you may not have any symptoms, or you may have symptoms, and you could be anywhere in between. And I was on the high end of the spectrum. I was having the symptoms. It was
Oh my goodness.
pandemonium. My life was changing as a result of navigating this. One of the biggest symptoms is having an excessively heavy period. And I had always had a heavy period. I only, as of like the last 6 months,
Oh my
do I have a
goodness.
light period, and it's like so light that I might
Oh,
be okay because I've had all the surgeries now.
right,
But
right.
prior to that, it was just a logistical nightmare having to go anywhere because I had to have tampons on me. I had to have pads on me. I had to know what the bathroom was. I had to think about what I was wearing. How long could I sit? How long could I wait before I had to change my tampon? So this was a constant mental process for me anytime I had my period and I had to go somewhere. So it was always very stressful. And also, when you're bleeding that heavily monthly, you are losing blood. And so you're not recovering blood at the same pace that you're losing it, for me anyway, because my period was so heavy at its peak. And when I say peak, that is like 2 to 3 years of being at its peak before something was done about it and I was able to get surgery. I
Mhm.
was using 100 tampons within the first 3 days of my period.
100
And so
tampons.
think about the blood loss factor there. And like, I'm a super active person. We met
Yeah,
at the
that's where we
gym.
met. I'm now realizing, oh my goodness, we met at Good Life. That's
Yes.
exactly where we met. Like there were not many black women
No.
running. And she would be at one treadmill and I'd probably be behind the counter and go run later. But I was like, yeah, that's another black woman running. Awesome.
And so, because of the difficulty I was running into with the medical system, and I go into much more detail in the
Yes.
episode, which was this past week's
Yeah.
episode, or seventh one, I had to do a lot of self management. And there were all kinds of symptoms, and I started to normalize them. So it became more challenging for me to recognize a symptom. Also, my pain threshold went up significantly because anytime I had a period, I was having insane cramps to the point where Advil didn't do anything. And you just have to tough it
Mhm.
out. You continue with your life. Dare you take some time off and be like, no, I'm still doing everything. And so one of my managements was, because you're losing so much blood, your red blood cell count is going down. Your red blood cells ultimately carry oxygen throughout the body. And so I became lethargic. Like, I could not exert myself without having to full on sit down for about 5 to 10 minutes and just catch my breath. And this would be from anything from walking from my parents' house to the bus stop when I was in university, going up the stairs of Hub
Oh my
Mall,
goodness.
going up any stairs. That was a
Hub
nightmare. I
Mall at the
hated it
University of
because I'm like,
Alberta.
how do
Hey.
I how I stop, catch my breath
Yeah.
without people noticing? I started to gain weight because I couldn't be as active as I wanted to be. And it just puts you into this mental space of creating trauma, because I went to so many different doctors, GPs, MediCenter, GP, MediCenter, trying to find a doctor that cared enough to really hear me. And because of that, that created a trauma response, because there's such a level of frustration when you're bleeding like that every month. You go to the bathroom and it's a crime scene each
Oh my
and every
goodness.
time. That's not going to put you in a great mental space. And then when you go to seek help, doctors look at you as if you're crazy. They say, oh, well, you're just depressed. And I'm like, no, I'm actually losing my mind because I am bleeding so much. And I'm trying to tell you something's wrong. And you're like, oh, well, your periods are meant to be, not regular at this particular age. And so it got to a point where anytime I would enter a doctor's office, regardless if anyone talked to me or not, I would start crying. I get into the exam room, and just being in the space made me cry.
Because
If I saw a
mhm.
diagram of fibroids,
Was that
crying, because it
because
was
yeah,
just
so was
like,
that
how do I get
because
out?
you expected not to be heard? What was so traumatic about that?
I couldn't even tell you. I think it was just the combination and the length of time, because it just, I couldn't even tell you. It was just all
Yeah.
of the things. It was just knowing, I guess there was probably a subconscious knowing that I'm in some kind of fight, because they're not going to believe me. I'm going to have to try and explain. I'm going to start crying. They're not going to respond to that at all. They're not going to respond to the emotion. I found that there was quite a severe lack of
Yeah.
emotional
Yeah.
intelligence. And if I push too hard, they'll get mad at me. If I start asking, well, how come you're doing this test instead of that test? I've had doctors full on yell at me just because I'm asking to understand so that I can have a better understanding of what's occurring, because I had a blood transfusion. My period wouldn't stop for 21 days. I could barely walk around. I was turned away by the University of Alberta Hospital because they didn't have a gynecologist. As soon as I said, my period won't stop, the nurse said, we don't have a gynecologist here. She didn't ask me any additional questions. I was barely like surviving. I go to the Misericordia Hospital. They do a blood test. They find out that my red blood cell count is sitting at about 40 to 60, and you need to be at 120. That is a normal state of affairs. So the fact that I was even conscious and moving around was shocking. And to the point that medical students started to come around to see me because they couldn't believe that I wasn't coding. And I was turned away from a hospital in this particular state. After the blood transfusion, I asked the doctor, so do we have an idea of why this happened in the first place? He said, no. There was no resolve. There was no
this is after
answer.
the blood transfusion.
This is after
Okay.
the blood
All
transfusion.
right. So you were,
And so for there to be no answer at that point, no like attempt to understand, no pelvic ultrasound, which would have told you what was going on, but none of that was
so
done.
can I ask you at
So
that
I was
point?
literally left
Okay,
on
can I
my
ask
own.
you at that point, like, how would you know, how earlier on you said, how would you know to ask for certain things? At that point, how would you have known to ask for stuff like a pelvic ultrasound and so on?
I wouldn't have.
Right.
I wouldn't have. Because at that point, I was still heavily reliant on doctors. And all I knew is that something isn't right here. I'm moving too slowly. I'm getting out of breath too slowly. Symptoms are also your hair falls out, your skin gets excessively dry behind my ears, started to peel, which is so random. And my hair broke off significantly. And just kind of out of nowhere, I noticed it was like considerably shorter. And then I also couldn't stand in the sun. I had gone on a cruise with a friend before I had surgery. I couldn't get off the boat. Getting off the boat was hell. I'd get off, stand outside and be like, I can't do this, and go back inside. It was awful because we were so excited for this cruise. And then I was literally a lump on a log that was napping all the time because I was so tired. And then I also started to my weight significantly changed. I probably gained about 20 pounds within this time frame, just because my stamina was going down. And I ran track and field, and I just was not able to keep pace anymore. And then you've got the freshman 15 as well coming at you. And so it was just a combination of things that weren't conducive to figuring this thing out. I even went to a doctor before I went on an international trip because I'm like, my period won't stop. I am about to get on a plane. I need something. And all she did was give me a box of birth control. No discussion. Here, you can take that. I had no idea that there's actually a chart for birth control, and you pick the one that's right for you based on the percentage of estrogen and progesterone in it.
No just idea. Handed it to you.
But she didn't have that
conversation. All right. So at which point does it get worse or better?
Oh, it did a steady decline. A steady decline over the years. I just got better at management. So once I had the blood transfusion, I changed my lifestyle considerably. That's when I really started going to the gym, and I would lose about almost 50 pounds from then onward, because I'm like, oh my God, I have all this energy I have not had in years. Like, my goodness. And that's when I found the gym.
Were you able to run during your period after the blood transfusion, or was it still like?
I was, but I had to be very methodical about it. And I became acutely aware of how my body felt. So I could feel when my hemoglobin was going down, or my red blood cell count. I could feel it, because if I was running and I couldn't make it through the run without stopping, or I felt lightheaded, I'm like, okay, my iron is low. Let me get the supplements in there. And then I start to figure out a system. So when I would have my period, I would double up on my iron to accommodate for the loss of the blood, and just kind of carry it through that time frame. And so I also started doing more tests so that I could monitor for myself. So if I felt low, I'd go to the doctor and be like, I need a blood test. I want to see where my levels are at. So that way I could confirm if my management system was working. If I felt something, I wanted to be able to confirm, am I feeling it because of this or is it something else? So I got really good at being able to read my own body in
So,
that
Lila,
fashion.
it seems to me at that point that you were functioning from a point of view, maybe for the rest of my life, I would need to be able to just manage this. Is that, did you ever think that there would be a
Yeah,
resolution to this?
no, I didn't, because I didn't know it was
Oh,
fibroids. I
jeez.
didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. I didn't find out it was fibroids until about like 2016-ish or so. And I got my blood transfusion in like 2001, 2002. So that's an extended period of time of just self-management. And so because I changed my lifestyle, that lent itself to just being stronger in general. Like, and I mean like changed
Mhm.
everything. I stopped eating any kind of crap. I became very dedicated and stringent with the way that I ate to fuel my body. I was working out a lot because I really viewed myself. I'm like, okay, I can be an athlete now, even though I wasn't playing any kind of sport.
At
I was just
all.
like training for
Right,
life,
right.
really. And so I was working out 5 days a week, like clockwork. But
I
I
know
was
you
in
were
that
that
gym
gym
for more than an
every
hour
day.
anytime I was there.
Remember the Sundays in particular? Sundays, oh my God, were special
Yes,
days. Yeah. So,
yes. So that really lent itself to just living
mhm,
better. And I think that had an impact, but it certainly didn't make the bleeding go
right.
away. I started to normalize it. I just got
Oh my
used to it.
goodness. So, I want to jump ahead to a question that the question is, do you think it might have been uh that it might have been possible to diagnose you um quicker or before
Oh, yeah.
for
Oh,
fibroids?
my
And
God.
why didn't
Yes.
that happen? Can we start there and then you take us into how you found out? Like how is it not
Yeah.
possible that you knew about it, that they didn't know about this before? What do you attribute that to?
I think it's a lack
Ah,
of
jeez.
awareness, flat out. I think it's a lack of awareness. I think that not enough doctors know that it's common in Black women. Because if I was in the States, particularly if I was in Atlanta, Chicago, the states that have a higher Black population, I would have gotten treatment much sooner because they would be aware. But, I'm in Alberta where it's predominantly white. And this was at a time where the level of awareness around minorities and the disparity of minorities when it comes to the health system, that wasn't anything being talked
Right.
about or even looked at or being taken
Hmm.
seriously. All I needed is one doctor to care enough to really dive deep into it. But they were all too quick to be like, oh, well, it's nothing. This is normal for your age. You're supposed to have irregular periods at this age. But the thing is, like, I started early. I got my
Oh
period
my
at
goodness.
11.
Yeah.
So by the time I started seeing a doctor for a period that wouldn't stop, I was about 21. So that's like 10, 11 years of having it. And you're still saying, oh, well, it's normal for your periods to be irregular at this age. When I started to really gain weight, at my heaviest, I was at 192,
And how tall are you?
right? I'm
Oh
five
my
nine.
goodness. Yeah. Okay. That's not
Yeah.
like super
So
heavy, but for
it's not
you,
super
yeah.
heavy, but for me, it was,
Because you're tall. She's tall
when I
and
look at pictures,
statuesque, you
my
guys. Like you should see her. She looks like a model.
bless your heart. But when I look back at pictures, you can definitely like all of it. Like my face is
Mhm.
round. It's just like there was just a lot more of me to
Yeah, yeah.
love. And so that was also a sign, but they just didn't do a deep enough dive
Ah.
into what was causing this. And like right down to the hospital that said, you can't be here. How are you going to turn someone away that shows up to emergency and says, I'm not stopping bleeding, I'm just bleeding forever, and you don't ask any other
I'm gonna ask a
questions?
very subjective
That's what I'm talking
subjective
about.
question. How much of that do you think is attributed to your skin color and to your race?
That's the $1,000,000 question,
Yeah,
right? So
we don't know.
one can never say for sure, but the consistency with which things like this happen to
Yeah.
minority group members, to Black women, and instigates that angry Black woman stereotype. As soon as I try to ask a question, I haven't raised my voice, I haven't called you a name. I'm just a normal person trying to have a conversation with you, but yet you blow up at me because I've asked you
Yeah.
why.
So let me just put a little piece in here so we can move on to the last experience which prompted that last podcast. You guys go listen. Like, the conversation is the relationship. You find it on Spotify and it's on Apple too, right? And are you on Google?
Yes, Apple and
On Google
Amazon
Podcast?
and
Amazon
Amazon
Music,
Music.
yeah. Because did you hear that Google Podcast is going away? I didn't even, yeah.
No, but
Oh
good
my
to
goodness,
know
yeah. I
now.
started out putting mine on there, but I'm like, what is the point? Don't get people on a diet that you cannot sustain. So fast forward a couple years after your insistence on so many tests and so on, it's then discovered that you have uterine fibroids. And so begin. Take us
Yes.
there to meeting Dr. Smith and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was traveling in Europe, and my GP, because my period was changing, I was starting to slowly notice that it was getting heavier and heavier and heavier. So ultimately becoming more challenging to manage. I was getting to the point where on my first few days, so we're talking like day 1 to day 3, I was having to change my tampon about every hour if I wanted to survive. Like, there was no wearing a tampon without wearing an overnight
Yeah.
pad, to be completely
Yeah.
frank with
Yeah.
people and going
Yeah.
places. So usually my purse was just
So were you
full
working
and it
during
wasn't full
those
of stuff.
first
It
three
was,
days, for example? Were you able to go to
oh yeah,
work?
I was
Like,
like, my life did not stop.
wow.
I was still living. Like, that's the thing. This world does not allow for a woman to be like, something's going on here. Let me take some time off. No, I was still doing everything, whether it was going to the gym, going to work, going to a party. I was just like, okay, I'm going to end up getting up a lot of times. And so I got to a point where I would kind of borderline announce it, just so that, because you start to kind of get
Hmm.
self-conscious. It's like people are going to notice that I'm in and out of this bathroom on the regular. And then you also get very self-conscious of, don't leave a
Oh my
mess.
goodness.
Do not leave any splatters of blood
Yeah.
anywhere. Make sure everything is clean when
Hmm.
you leave. Like, it's just not a way to be living. And so I'd gone to Europe. I knew my period was going to come when I
Hmm.
went to Europe. So I obviously traveled with tampons. I'm like, I'm not going to another country and having to even think about it, because I also was using super pluses. I'm not using your regular. A regular would last me 20
Wow.
minutes, or like the various sizes. It had to be
Super
super
plus. Yeah.
plus only.
Right. Every
That's
woman
where I was like,
here
not.
understands and knows for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I was on that trip, I remember getting my period. I just noticed, I'm like, it's getting a little heavier. And then I noticed that my stomach started to distend, even though I was still working out. But again, I normalized. I'm like, oh, I must be just gaining weight, which I'm like, that's crazy, because I didn't have that before. And now it's
Hmm.
there. And I didn't know it was the fibroids. Also, I was getting back pain. So I couldn't sit on a couch for a long period of time without there being some kind of like
Hmm.
back pain. So I actually started sitting beside my couch on a different chair. And again, just normalizing it. I'm thinking, oh, I must have hurt my back when I was working out, whatever the case might be. And so when I got back, I'm like, you know what? Let me go to the
Hmm.
doctors. Something's happening here. And so my GP gave me some medication. It was a sample called Fibristol. He's like, this is on the market. It's been used to shrink fibroids. Let's give it a shot and
Hmm.
see. You take it for 3 months on, 1 month off. So I did 2 rounds of that, and I saw progress. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? Let's get into the specialist, because something ain't right here. And it feels like the Fibristol is just a temporary solution. So I would end up meeting Dr. Smith in
Hmm.
2018, June. That would be our first appointment. First thing he told me was to stop taking the Fibristol, because it had been found to cause problems with people's livers. And so I was concerned, because I'm like, does that mean they're going to grow back? Because if you read the instructions on the box, it says that that can
Mm.
happen. And he said, we will monitor it. We'll see what happens. So this was the closest I had ever been to anybody paying enough attention and caring and feeling like something was happening to help provide resolution. And so after that, that just reaffirmed, okay, I need to continue to monitor. I need to continue with my blood tests and my ultrasound. So I would do them somewhat
Hmm.
regularly. I also came to realize my GP was exactly that,
Yeah, let's
general.
talk about
So
that.
I'm just going to use you now to take my order versus rely on the information that you provide me with. Because also at the same time, I caught this episode of The Real Housewives of Atlanta, which features Black women. And there was one lady going through the issue in real time. Her name is Cynthia
Mm.
Bailey, and she was having the fibroid issue. So she was talking about how she was bleeding excessively, how her stomach was distending, how she was feeling so tired. And they showed in the episode her going to the doctor and talking about having surgery. And I was gobsmacked. I'm like, oh my God, that sounds like what I have. And so I went to my GP and I'm like, could it be fibroids? He's like, oh yeah, that's what you have. As if I just knew already. And I'm like, no. And so I called him out on it. I'm like, hold on. This is the first time you've ever really made that association that, oh, this is happening because
And how
of
long have you
this.
been seeing this GP in particular? This has been your person since
Oh,
like 2016?
this one I finally settled on. So it had been a couple of years, or probably a year or two at that point, but it wasn't like I was going in the doctor I was going purely to be like, oh, it's time for me to do a blood test. I need a requisition. Oh, I want to do an ultrasound. I want a requisition. That is more of what I was doing than anything else. And then one thing that I didn't do that I could have done more of in hindsight was look at my own test results. I was relying on the GP to interpret my test results and provide me with the information. And so in doing that, he would always downplay the fibers. Oh, they're small. They're not doing anything. We're just going to watch them. When really they were doing a lot. They were increasing in size regularly. And he just wasn't framing it as, this is an issue. Let's do something about this. But that day when he's like, oh, yeah, it's your friend. I'm like, so can they cause my stomach to distend? Yeah. And I was also starting to go pee excessively. I would feel pressure to have to go to the washroom, but then I wouldn't be able to go. But I would go to the washroom, and then it feel like I had to go again. And so that was starting to happen. And so I started to count how many times I was getting up at night because it was impeding my sleep. And so there was one night where I got up 6 times, and I'm like, okay, well, that's
you know what I like that you said in the podcast, like you will count the number of times. She is that kind of person.
Oh, I'm not playing. I'm like, because doctors don't pay attention to generalities. You have to be, what I have found is that the more specific I am, the more I can hold you to the information that you give me. Because then if I say, oh, I'm just peeing a lot, they won't connect it as serious. But I say, I am peeing 6 times a night. You have to pay attention to me giving you a specific number. It really became a matter of me learning how to better communicate in a way that did not allow them to brush me off. So I became more direct, which again, doctors don't love that. And so it became more about my attitude versus attributing to my directness to the situation I am in, i.e. losing pints of blood monthly and just trying not to die every month and just trying to survive.
So let's fast forward, because number one, we want people to go listen to the entire podcast because everything's laid out there. And I'm so grateful for the way that you were able to methodically plot that journey from the time you were like 11 to what was going on to all the way up to just recently, like late last year, even this year. So the entire story is there. What I'd love for us to do now is to go into when you finally get the specialist and that experience that prompted even a review from the board and how you felt so betrayed by what was done. And I'd love to be able to get into, Lillah, from your experience, what can the Black person do to advocate for herself or himself in the medical system right now in Edmonton and perhaps in wider Canada? So let's talk about now you get into a specialist, and you know how you said, okay, this one was so promising because there was, he came in like a knight in shining armor. We are going to monitor this.
Yeah. So what ended up happening is after that appointment, I would continue to do tests. However, unbeknownst to me, because I had never really seen a specialist before. So one thing that apparently is common and standard is if you don't see that specialist within a year's time, you are no longer a patient of that office, and you have to go through the referral process again. So for people getting a referral to a specialist, that can take anywhere from like 6 months, 9 months, a year, depending on the specialist that you're going to. It can be shorter, but most often it's a long wait. And so I'm thinking every time I'm doing a test, the results are going to him. So I'm not concerned. I'm just doing the test, keeping things abreast of what's going on. And so I had done an ultrasound and noticed, okay, things had grown a little bit, but not too much. It would actually be over a year later, I would do a MRI because at the time I was working with another Black lady, which is a rarity. And I was sharing with her what I was going through. And she's like, oh, I had something like that. Sometimes it ends up being a
Oh my goodness.
hysterectomy.
Oh,
And I'm like, hold
no.
on now.
Yeah.
Whoa, what? And so she said to me, she's like, go and get an MRI. The ultrasound is not going to show you enough. Go and get an MRI. It'll have a more clear picture. And literally, it was because of her that I walked on over to my GP. I put in my order. I want to do an MRI. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't, what do you think? It was me asking for
And
what
he
I
was just
wanted.
like, sure,
I
no
want to do
problem,
an
right?
MRI. Yep. And I got the requisition, did the MRI, and that MRI blew me out of the water because it showed that not only had my fibroids grown, but some had more than doubled in
So how did
size.
you know to
So
interpret the MRI? Was it like just very simple, or you had to? Um,
No, the MRI was
okay.
standard MRI stuff, nothing super special
Mm.
there. And so once my GP got those results, called me in to talk about them, he's like, okay, yeah, let's go back to the specialist. But my GP also did not know about the 1 year patient rule. So we're sitting here waiting, because I'm still doing blood tests. And so I go in from time to time and I'll ask, have you heard anything back yet? Have you heard anything back? I didn't realize I was no longer a patient of the office and we had to start the referral process again. He did not realize that because he's like, I don't know. I've sent many messages and I'm just not hearing back. And so it would be a year before I would get back in. I wouldn't get back in until October 2020. My first appointment was in June 2018. So at that time, when I went in 2020, I was crying, surprise, surprise, devastated. And he was very empathetic, supportive. He's like, yeah, you need surgery. So we're going to figure this out. He's like, I don't think I can do the surgery as one because you have so many. He's like, I would like to get a second opinion to see if another surgeon can do it as one surgery. Come back in a month. Now, as part of that appointment, this was also at the beginning
Yeah,
of COVID.
right.
So we had been COVID probably about 6 months at that point. So nobody knows what's going on. We're wiping down our
Oh
groceries.
yeah,
We're wearing
menace.
gloves
Yeah,
everywhere. We're putting
yeah.
hand sanitizers on our gloves and thinking they're new. And so I was doing the same thing. And then I have a good friend of mine that's a nurse. And when I had mentioned in passing that, yeah, I wear my gloves and then I hand sanitize them, she's like, nope, you shouldn't be doing that. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then she said, you wouldn't put hand sanitizer on a used
Oh,
condom and use it
yeah.
again. And when she said that, I'm like, oh,
Wow.
well, you are correct. That drives the point all the way home. Let me change my
Yeah.
ways. And so when I was at the doctor's office, I see him leaving an exam room, walking towards mine, and he stops to put hand sanitizer on his gloved hands. And what happens with fibroids is sometimes you'll have an internal exam done by the doctor with their hand. And so when I saw that, after getting the information from my friend, being in a pandemic, like all of these things say, be extra cautious. When he came into the room, I asked him if he could change his glove because I saw him put hand sanitizer on. Simple question. And I would like to believe if you have any level of emotional intelligence, you'd be able to read that as your patient is uncomfortable with the current state
Yeah.
of affairs. So I asked him to change his gloves. It wasn't an immediate yes. It wasn't, oh, let me just do that. Sure, why not? It became him trying to justify why it was okay for him to do that, telling me it was industry standard, which now you ask a doctor if he would put hand sanitizer on his gloves and then use them, they wouldn't. But he was telling me it was industry standard. So we're
So
going back
was it
and forth.
industry standard back then, you think? I wonder.
I don't,
Because
the thing is, regardless of if it was industry standard or not, even if that was, say, their guideline and that was acceptable, it's the fact that as a doctor, it is your job. You've taken an oath to support your patient and to help them feel
yeah.
comfortable. I have told you that I'm uncomfortable by way of the question I've asked. This is nothing. All you got to do is
Yeah.
change your gloves. You have
But
1,000
how
in the
dare
office.
you, with your black female self, say something and advocate for yourself and then give an analogy that's intellectual? Oh my goodness, Lillah.
So yeah, I said it because it was going back and forth. And I'm like, I need to make this stop. Like, I don't understand why this is a discussion. And so I said the same thing to him. You wouldn't put hand sanitizer on a used condom and use it again. And you could see him take pause, and then he changed the gloves. And then we had our appointment. That
And
was it.
when I heard you say that, and later on, what transpired, I always go back to that example and the way that your example to him prompted him to take the action that you wanted. So it was warranted to give such a like a stark example to kind of get him, jolt him into action. Yeah,
Yeah.
that for sure. Like there was no other way. I don't think that he would have done it. So it was
Otherwise, we would have been
warranted.
going back and
Exactly.
forth and just
Yeah,
unnecessary. You're making me feel more
yeah,
uncomfortable by telling me my request is too big for you to
yeah,
handle with your actions that you're
yeah,
giving me.
yeah.
So I come back a month later. I meet the second surgeon. In the podcast, I call
Dr.
her
Jean,
Dr.
yeah.
Jean.
Hmm.
Amazing. It's a woman. I'm like, oh my God, you are the second coming. Like I was elated because I had never gotten this close to real action being taken, to people hearing me and being like, yes, we're going to do something. We're going to do it soon. We can do something about this. And so she was like the second coming, without a doubt. And I'm very vocal with my gratitude. I'm a speaker by nature. So I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you for today. Anything she did, she could have just looked at me and be like, thank you for that.
Because you didn't have
Thank
it
you for this
before,
requisition.
right?
Thank you for this
Yeah.
appointment. Because I'd never experienced that before. And so she's like, yeah, we can do this. It's not a problem. And in that month's time frame, I had more time to think about the fact that I had been doing all of these tests and I wasn't able to get back into the office for 2 years, and that nobody told me about this 1-year patient policy. So from my perspective, there's a hole in your process in the office. That's incredibly important information for a patient to have, to know that if they don't come back in a year,
Yeah.
you are no longer a patient of the office and you have to reapply
Yeah.
essentially to
That
get back
happened to
in.
me.
Yet nobody told me that. Not the doctor, not Dr. 1, not Dr. 2, not the staff at the reception desk. And like I work in compliance in my day job, so I am acutely aware of process, procedure, risk, and controls. And so I had more time to think about it. And I'm like, you know what? There's something that's not quite right there. Like, if I'm sending you all these tests and then there's a test that says, hey, things are exponentially worse, why aren't I
Yeah.
hearing from you? You said we would monitor. So after I had my initial meeting with Dr. Jean, because she is who I saw first on that day, went straight to her. We had a conversation. We came up with next steps. I even was so bold to say, you know what? Can you be my doctor going forward? I just knew right away that I didn't want to continue working with Dr. Smith, just in light of you dropped the ball. You dropped the ball big time. And I've lost 2 years worth of time as a result. I don't have time to be messing around. Also, I had to convince you to change your gloves. So none of that said, I trust. None of that said, you're taking me seriously. For me, it said, you know what? We've got a better situation over here. Let's just formalize the relationship. So I asked her on the spot, can you be my doctor going forward? And she's like, yeah. And then I shared with her my concerns about Dr. Smith. And I definitively asked her, because I knew that one, I didn't want to do anything to impede my ability to get surgery this close to getting surgery.
Finally.
And so I wanted to make sure I was dotting the I's, crossing the T's, doing everything in an appropriate fashion to get the result I was looking for. So again, consciously aware of the fact that I cannot raise my voice. I cannot be rude. I have to be methodical in how I approach this. So let me ask his colleague, who's another doctor. And I asked her, what do you think I should do after I explained everything to her? And she's like, I think you should tell him. I think you should let him know how you feel. So another one supporting advocacy, saying, yes, you should do this. She then brought him back into the office. She left. He stood at the door. I'm sitting on an exam table in another corner. So we're diagonally across from each other, tons of space. And I proceed to ask him, I'm like, you know what? I just wanted to talk to you because I had some concerns. I felt like I was left to fall through the cracks. You said that we would monitor it. I have been doing all of these tests. And there was a test that showed things had really gone bad, but I didn't hear from you. There was no follow-up. So can you help me understand what your process is? That is what I asked him. It wasn't accusatory. It was, this is how I felt, and I would like to understand your process. Just help me understand. I was seeking to understand. And instead, he chose to tell me that he had 80 other files on his desk, that he didn't have the time to action. And then he's like, you were also rude to me. I was shocked and amazed because nobody walks around saying that I'm rude. Like, you won't get that feedback from anybody that I interact with. So I'm like, okay, I got to keep the conversation moving forward. I'm like, okay, You said I'm rude. Can you please tell me how I was rude? Because again, I'm seeking to understand, not being combative, not getting defensive. And he's like, well, the condom comment you made. And I was surprised. I was surprised. I'm like, you're a doctor. I'm
Common,
talking about
yeah.
a
Like
condom.
what? So
That's,
strange about that.
that shouldn't even
Yeah,
faze you in the slightest. But what really got me was the fact that you have been upset for a
yeah.
month. For 30 days, you've been sitting on this, and this is the moment you want to bring it up to me. Otherwise, you would have never brought this
Mm-hmm.
up to me had I not asked you about your
Yeah.
processes. And you're now using it as a slight against me. And so, me being me, because again, I want the conversation to move forward. I'm not here to hang out
Yeah.
in this. This is not the issue or the point I'm trying to make. You're bringing it to the table. So let's move
So
past it. I'm like,
just before you continue, Lila, like what something that just it's just all over this thing that the fact that this is just a woman looking for help from like
mm-hmm,
way back in 2016, a woman with a problem that's distinctly female looking for
mm-hmm,
help was lost in the entire process. That to the fact that here you are, like bleeding so much, the fibroids are getting bigger, and he wants to talk about you. You brought up a used condom comment, a condom, you know what I mean, like a used condom comment, and that you were rude, and you're looking for help. That the humanity of the person is lost, I guess, depending on who it is. It's all over the podcast, and I just want to I wish I could virtual hug from all of us listening, virtual hug for what you went through and what a lot of black people go through in the system, minorities go through in the system. And we had this comment from Violet here who spent significant time in the UK, and she's like, it's the same system there. So, and she's black
mm-hmm,
as well. Okay, let's just continue. So
mm-hmm.
we're gonna go over an hour. Are you okay with that? You have some time? Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, you
yeah,
guys.
I'm fine.
So I
I'm
hope you stick around
fine.
with us because we want to talk about resolution and move on to other things as well if we have the time. So yeah,
Yeah. So when he told me that, I apologized because
yeah,
that's
that's
who
the
I
Canadian
am.
thing to
I'm
do.
like,
Okay.
I'm not
Can I
here
just
to
say
get in
and
my
one more
defense.
thing, right, Lila? That's a Canadian thing to do. You know why? I was listening to an interview with Candace Owens not too long ago. She just got
Mhm,
fired, right? Just got fired from
mhm.
the Daily Show, the Daily something, the Daily, right? And
Okay.
it was because of an interview that she had with a rabbi, and she just refused to apologize. She said, I'm not going to apologize for what I don't believe. Like, this is not me, whatever. He was trying to get her to acquiesce, to say that what she was thinking was wrong. And she's like, no, I don't believe it. I called her a hag or whatever. I believe she's a witch. And she just went on and on. So that thing about apologizing, I think it's uniquely Canadian. It serves us well, I guess. Yeah, please continue and tell us how this got, like, yeah, take us to how, yeah, go
Mhm.
ahead. Mhm.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the apology piece because, like, do I think I was wrong? No. But I was doing it to clearly this man's ego was hurt. And I'm like, look, if this is what you need so we can move on to
Mhm.
the point, I'm happy to give it because this just doesn't matter to me. I'm not here
Yeah,
about a condom
yeah.
comment. And so I apologized, but he said,
Mhm.
nope, you were rude to
Mhm.
me. You can no longer be my
Mhm.
patient. You need to get a new
Mhm.
doctor. And then he left the room. And I was so shocked. I just sat there for like 10 minutes, like, what just happened? And so when I finally got up, I went immediately to my car, got in the car, got on the Google machine on my phone, and I started looking up how to
Yeah.
make a complaint because I found that behavior to be incredibly inappropriate. If you're that upset about something I said, tell me right away. Don't wait 30 days and then only bring it up when it serves you. Because he was looking for a
Yeah.
way out. And he used that in that moment to be his way out because I was questioning what he was doing. I was just asking for you to tell me, explain
Mhm.
to me. And so when I called the CPSA, which is the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, the regulatory body through which a patient can make a
Mhm.
complaint, the representative specifically told me, do you need any other services from the office? And I'm like, yeah, I've got a new doctor there, a new surgeon that I'll be working with going forward. She's like, okay, then I recommend that you wait to make your complaint. And I'm like, why? She's like, because it could impede your ability to get services from the office. And I again, like shock after shock after shock. I'm like, what do you mean? Are you telling me that they would be so petty as to keep a patient from getting service because someone's made a complaint. And so when I heard that, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to do anything to mess up my chances of getting surgery. So I did wait. That was November 2020. I would not make my complaint until May 2021. Okay. And in that complaint, I would go through everything. I had receipts, dates, timelines, because I would start to acquire my own medical records so I could have copies for myself. And you have to be very thorough. Again, meticulous, attention to detail. This is where I excel. So I would lodge that complaint. It would be 2.5 years before I would get a response. And I would check in from time to time, but every now and then you'd get a letter from them saying, oh, it hasn't been assigned to anybody yet. It hasn't been assigned to anybody yet. I would call them and they would say, don't call. They got to a point where they started changing the verbiage of the letter you would get. And in the letter, it would specifically say, do not call our office to inquire. It only extends the time frame of us getting to your complaint.
Well, that sounds like retaliation for calling. How exactly?
Oh my gosh. I was shocked that they would put that into a letter and send it to people.
Wow.
So 2.5 years later, and by then I would have had my 5 surgeries, 3 with Dr. Jean, 2 with an additional third doctor. But I would end up having an interview with the investigator, finally, June 2023. So the day after my last surgery. And I remember when she was trying to schedule, she's like, oh, we can move it. I'm like, nope, I have been waiting. We're going to do this now. And so I recounted everything, which I found interesting because I'm like, you want me to recount everything, even though it's been 2.5 years and I've written it to you in document form where it's super concise and to the point. And so she also recorded our conversation.
And you recorded as well.
And, so,
and you say that in the podcast.
Yes, sure. I did record it because I'm meticulous like that. And at this point, I'm a little less trusting of the whole situation as a whole because it took so long for them to even talk to me. And then you're asking me to recount things that I've already written to you in detail. And you want me to recount things from 2.5 years ago. So it was just a lot. And the funny thing is I actually forgot that I recorded it, but I ended up recording it. And then in September of 2023, I would get the response investigative report. And it just, words don't describe, because in the report, the summary provided by the investigator from the jump was providing inaccurate statements, providing inaccurate summaries of what I had said to her. And so from Dr. Smith saying that he found my demeanor to be hostile, aggressive, and that I was rude. And the thing is, with him, I was less surprised because you had shown me who you were in that moment when you decided to say, you're not my patient anymore, rather than talk through the situation. And so I was less surprised there. But what really got me was Dr. Jean, because we had a glowing relationship. I've never had that kind of relationship with a doctor ever. You were listening to me, you were invested, and you were just so kind. And just so anytime I had a surgery, she'd be right there. And I didn't realize you didn't want to see the doctor after, because that meant something didn't quite go the way you had hoped. I was happy to see her. She'd tell me, yo, we had to do this again. We'll have to give it another try. There was trust there. And so anytime she did anything, I'm like, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I just need you to know that. It just means so much to me. Very verbal with my gratitude. And in the response letter, she said that she agreed with Dr. Smith about me being rude to everybody. And that is what hurt me the most, because I trusted you. I asked you what to do before doing it. You've never seen me interact with anybody else in the office because it was always just us one-on-one in the exam room.
It was a lot of lies. Like, is there any other way to? Is there any polite way to say it?
No, because it was lies from them, lies from the front desk staff. They said that I had one surgery that ended up being canceled because I drank the wrong juice, which was my fault. I own that. I got exotic. When they say drink clear, they only mean water, tea, or apple juice. I drank clementine juice. I thought, oh, it's still clear. And I even poured it in the glass, made sure I could see through it, did all of that. And when I told the admitting nurse, so I only spoke to the admitting nurse, because when you're in a hospital, you get your locker, They do your whole
Mm-hmm.
weight thing. They ask you about fasting, and then you're in a gown and you sit in a waiting room.
Right.
You're not in a bed
Yeah.
yet. And so when I was telling her what I drank, she's like, you know what? Let me just check with the anesthesiologist. I'm not going to lie. A part of my heart sank because I'm like, oh my
I
gosh,
shouldn't have said
what do you mean?
anything. It was clear. It was okay. But I mean,
And I was
yeah.
honest. I could have lied, but
But
I
the most,
didn't.
I
And
think, like
so
what was,
she came back to me and said that they had to cancel because of
and
what I
but
drank.
what they said was that you drank a smoothie. Like, how is
Yeah, in
clementine
the
juice?
investigative
Yeah.
report, it says that I talked to the anesthesiologist and I reported to them that I drank a smoothie.
Wow.
I never saw the anesthesiologist that
Okay.
day
All right.
because you go into a different room to
Mm-hmm.
see them. So I didn't talk to you, and I know what a smoothie is. That is crushed up food, and it's certainly
Clear.
not
Yeah.
clear. So why would you say that? On top of that, the investigator said that I blamed the office, the front desk staff, for the cancellation of my surgery. Also never happened. I was on the couch for 2 weeks crying straight. When I finally could get myself together, I called to reschedule my
Mm-hmm.
surgery. And the lady I spoke with, we would end up speaking quite often because she would always do my scheduling for the surgeries, of which I had five, of which I had five. So we were talking from time to time. And I remember distinctly asking her if I, or she asking me if I was okay because I was like borderline crying
Yeah.
on the phone to her trying to
Maybe
reschedule.
that was
And
perhaps rude. Maybe I'm just being facetious. Yeah.
well, I don't even
Yeah.
know. And so I remember telling her, I'm like, yeah, I drank the wrong
Mm.
juice. At no point in time did I blame the front desk. Why would I blame you for that? You weren't
Yeah.
there. You had nothing to do with the situation. Why would I blame you for the cancellation when I clearly made that mistake?
Yeah.
But yet it said I did blame them.
Before we go into the actual results of the investigation, I wanted to read this comment from. We actually have a doctor on the show. A doctor is watching right now.
Mhm.
So there's this comment from Ibiami Umago, and she says, "Oh my, I feel heartbroken just hearing Lila's story. I am a female doctor from West Africa, and she's right here in Edmonton, and I feel the anguish of this trauma that Lila has gone through. All any of the doctors had to do was search online heavy menstrual bleeding in a black. Geez,
Mhm.
this is so heartbreaking. And they would have seen answers to lead them to potential causes of what was going on. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Lila. Like one of the things after hearing the podcast that I hope you feel today is the support of your black community,
Yeah.
of the other black females from like all over the world, potentially going through similar situations. So tell us about the
Mhm.
results of this report. So,
So I got that September 19th. I promptly called my best friend and I was crying. I was devastated. Like words will never be able to describe what I felt because I'm like, I had never seen anybody reference me as being hostile or
aggressive and
aggressive
rude. Okay.
and like
Yeah.
rude. I'm like, rude. I knew he was going to say that because he said that to my face. But now you're adding to it without any supporting evidence. How was I aggressive? I did not raise my voice. I did not call you any names. We were sitting across the room from each other, and I was asking you a question in regular tonnage. And now that's hostile? Now that's aggressive? And so for me, it was very shocking to see the activation of the angry
Yeah.
Black woman stereotype, which really just has Black women being interpreted as being those things just because they're questioning a situation.
And
And
advocating for
also figuring
themselves.
out that no
Yeah.
matter what I say to a doctor, they'll protect
Yeah.
themselves. For Dr. Jean to be like, yes, I agree. I didn't even know what to do with that because it's like, I couldn't have been more grateful, appreciative, and just like you more. And now you've decided you
It
don't
didn't
like
even
me.
matter. Yeah, it didn't even matter.
Mhm.
So there's something that you said is very, very interesting that perhaps going to start to take us into how do we solve for these problems? And one of the things you said is that at this point you don't even have a GP right now, and that
I don't.
perhaps,
I
yeah,
need
and then
money.
you're saying that the prerequisite perhaps for that would be that that person is black as well. Do you still feel that way, and
Yeah.
why?
I'm going to be incredibly honest. I absolutely feel that way because prior to that, When I was originally looking for a GP, I would be met with different ethnicities. But then going to the specialist, so people that could actually do things, that were actually saying to me, we'll monitor. Yes, we'll work on this. They were really the people that I was spending the most time with and were learning my situation more intimately. They were all Caucasian. And so, or white, if
Yeah.
you want to
I,
say.
I did it. Sorry, by the
So,
way, I did an EDI a couple years ago, and somebody corrected me about Caucasian and said not to use it. Yeah.
oh, please. I'm not sure which one to use. I feel weird saying
What
white,
is it?
but I don't know. So I'll tend to go back and
Yeah.
forth
Okay.
depending.
Awesome. Good to hear.
But so I was in the ground. Like, I had to take time off work. I like instant depression, instant despair. And I remember telling my friend that I'm like, I just feel despair,
Yeah.
like in the true essence of the word, just not knowing what to do. Like, what do I do? How do I even begin? So they give you a 30-day
Hmm.
time frame to request a review of the decision. I spent 15 of those 30 days not being able to even move, not being able to do anything, because I was just literally trying to not end up in a depression hole of which I was already knocking at the
Yeah.
door, 1 foot in it already. And so I had to 100% tap into my resources, being I had like 2 girlfriends that really knew the whole
Yeah. Yeah.
situation. And then therapy was an absolute must, would not be here
Hmm.
without it. But I recognize I'm in a privileged spot, even having access to therapy in the
Yeah.
first place. And then also trying to figure out, how do I write this response? Because I did an initial writing, but of course it was full of emotion, because I'm like, how dare you do this to me? You don't know the emotional impact that
To
you're
a
causing.
human
And like,
being.
while all of this is going on, I'm also engaged in a fertility journey. So I'm doing IUI, I'm doing IVF. That was the whole point of going through the fibroid surgeries, was because we were trying to normalize my uterine cavity in order to be able to carry a baby. And so that's all happening in tandem to this. And so, as luck would have it, my sister would actually refer me to the African Canadian Civic Engagement
Hmm.
Council, and they provide advocacy support. So their president and CEO, who, again, God just blessed me with that
Yeah.
one. She would help me craft my response in a way that would be more conducive to getting my message across versus all the emotion I was feeling. And so she was incredibly helpful. And then the African Canadian Civic Engagement Council also wrote me a letter of advocacy
Hmm.
report or support that I was able to submit with it. And then she also recommended that I also take it to the ombudsman, which is my absolute
Yeah.
intention. With the ombudsman, you have to wait until you've exhausted the entire process of resolution with the original regulatory body before you can take it to them. So once I submitted my response or my request for a review on October 18th, I got a letter from the CPSA saying that they had received it and that they would look at it in June of
Okay.
this year. So at this point, we've gone from May 2021. I'm still in it. I am still in this process, however many years later, nearly 3 years later now, and I still have to wait to get a real resolution. And one thing people don't recognize is it pushed me to have to step back into the trauma. I having to recount and now tell you why the statements you've made are not true and have to provide support and evidence for that. I was reliving it, and I was reliving a new version of it, a version that was even worse than the first one.
Wow. Is this is this is infuriating on one level, but from one black woman to another, I'm thinking of all of the attending issues. Like, my cry is, if they would only get it, that this was just one human being just looking for
Mhm,
answers. If we could remove all the filters with which we are looked at
mhm,
and just see that this is just one human being who needs an answer to a question that it is possible to solve. Lala, like,
mhm.
it's so painful to think that if this had been diagnosed like all of these years ago, we would
Yeah.
not be here today.
My fertility situation would be
Yeah.
different. I would be in a better situation than I am
Hmm.
currently. I lost 2 years of time already being in my 30s. And so they, I don't know if they really care about that at this point. And that was really what I was trying to stress through my frustration, by asking him, like, why did I get
Yeah,
lost in the
exactly.
sauce? Why does nobody know whose job it is at the office to tell the patient about the 1 year
Hmm.
policy? Because I asked Dr. Jean, I'm like, can you tell me who's responsible for that? She didn't
Yeah.
know.
Well, she wasn't much help. I mean, she did the very polite thing, be very nice to your face, but when it came to the bread, I guess she chose what was perhaps,
She
yeah,
chose
she chose
discrimination. She
discrimination.
supported the
Yeah,
discrimination.
yeah. So what's a girl to do now? What's up for you?
So for me, a big piece of the healing process is getting to the point of being able to talk about it. For a long time, I couldn't. I really couldn't. I didn't want to talk about it because after having to write that review, I'm already reliving it. I'm reliving it in real time. I'm reliving it by having to recount everything. And so you kind of just want to
Hmm.
forget. And so I spent quite a few months just not doing that. I love Christmas as well. So Christmas was coming. I'm like, you know what? I just want to like not have to think
Hmm.
about it and just like live. And so that took quite a bit of time, quite a bit of therapy. And then I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? In order to move on, we got to
Yeah.
talk about it so I can release it from my body. And so I started with a small group of girlfriends. We go to dinner regularly. And I told my best friend, I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to
That's
tell
dark.
them. But it also meant I had to tell them about the fertility journey. I couldn't just tell them about the fibroids so that they could get the big picture. And again, none of these women are Black, predominantly white with like two Asian in the mix.
Mm.
And so right up until the words left my mouth, I'm like, I'm gonna do it. Oh, I'm not sure.
Mm.
Oh, I am gonna do it. Oh, I don't know. I'm a little scared. Maybe we don't need to do it today. Like just the back and forth of the mental
Hmm.
struggle. And so I did tell them, and of course they were very supportive. And that was a huge moment for me because what people don't recognize is the depth and the breadth of impact of discrimination. I am a strong person. I'm outgoing. I'm confident, and I'm a public speaker. So I have no problem being in the public eye. This made me want to hide. It definitively made me want to hide because now I trusted the world a little
Mm.
less. And I became acutely aware of people's impressions of me, regardless, because now I was shown that regardless of what I actually say or do, or how nice I am, or how kind I am to a person, you're just going to decide what you want to believe, whether you have proof for that or not. Because that's what happened with the doctor. I was so kind to
Oh,
this lady.
geez.
I was so grateful to this lady. And she decided to lie on me.
Lala, here's the thing. There's a part of me that, as you said, that thinks that a lot of Black people think exactly what you think. Like
Hmm.
you had to go through this really traumatic experience to get it, to kind of get to that point. But it seems to me that that is the feeling of so many Black people. Has that
Yeah.
ever like, have you kind of wrestled with that to know that?
I'm wrestling with it currently because when that happened, you always hear about the disparities in the health system. You hear about those things. But when it doesn't happen to someone we know or to ourselves directly or an acquaintance or a friend of a friend, we allow that information to pass us by. We don't hold on to it. We don't anchor it in any way. It's like, oh, another thing in the world of calamity in which we are here at this moment, another thing to be
Yeah.
added. And so a big part of me telling my girlfriends was, you know what? They know me. They have been there since the beginning of Black Facts, of Afro Facts. They have been to my parties. They know what I'm about. They know why I started that game. They also know my
Mm.
personality. I'm a lover, I'm not a fighter. And so I knew that if I told them, it would anchor differently within their
Right.
minds because now you know someone that that's happened to. And so that way, if they were ever to share the story, then it becomes, oh, I know a friend of a friend that this
Hmm.
happened to. So it creates more of an attachment to the information. And that's really what I wanted to do. And so after doing that, I would spend a lot of time thinking about it. And that's when the idea of the podcast came to me because I'm like, you know what? Everybody needs to know.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
no more
Yeah.
secrets. I'm putting it out on Front Street because in the industry in which I work, I do various presentations for different organizations. I'm hosting throughout the city. So people have a sense of who I am. They either know me or I'm an acquaintance to them. So it gives an opportunity to put a face and a voice to the
Yeah, the
story.
different.
And it'll be harder for you to ignore it knowing who I am.
Exactly.
And that's really what I wanted to do, is really create space to be able to amplify the voices of different minority group members so that we can consistently hear their stories, see the commonalities from minority group to minority group, see the real commonalities when it comes to these systems that are specifically working against us, where people will often try to deny that. And it's like, no, I am living proof of the emotional impact, of the mental impact, of all of the impact. And somehow I've been able to make it to some sort of other side. But that is purely because I have tools available to me to utilize, that I can absolutely see and understand why a patient might not go back to a doctor.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then the doctor will be like, well, you're an uncompliant patient. No, you've done something that has made me feel so uncomfortable, so unsafe. I'm never going to put myself in that
Yeah.
situation again.
So
Some people don't make it through these things, and I just happen to be lucky enough to do
I'm
so.
happy you're getting out on the other side of it, and all the best. Like, I hope, in the review of the report, that there's something that brings you justice, basically. That's what it is. We have a question here from Noel Mark Solomon. She says, have you ever had the opportunity to speak to the doctor you liked that lied?
Now, I'm a communicator. If I was presented with that opportunity, 100%, I would
I
speak to them, because I'm a communicator. You need to know. I think a lot of people walk around in this world not knowing that they're negatively impacting people. And how can I expect things to get better if I don't tell you what you've done? And so I would love to do that. From an investigative perspective, it presents difficulty, because one thing I did do is I brought it to the attention of the office that, it doesn't seem like anybody knows who is responsible for telling the patient about the 1-year policy. And so when I made the complaint about it, I noted that in there, and I actually followed up with the office probably about a year and some later. So I also made note of that, because that's who I am. Any negative interaction that
Yeah,
occurred, I have written it down for records. And I actually called. I was looking for some other information, but I wanted to follow up and just see. I'm like, oh yeah, so like, whose job is it to provide that? And as soon as she asked me, well, why are you looking for that information? I'm like, oh, I had made it a complaint where I brought that up, and I just wanted to see if something had been done about it. Instant change in her demeanor and her voice with me. Well, why are you calling about something that happened however many years ago? And I'm like, because I want to see if there's been any impact. And instantly, it was a matter of trying to get me off the phone.
Yeah, for sure.
And
probably
so
had.
that really indicated that because there was a complaint in play, that they weren't going to give any information. And so I've taken that as a sign, in the sense of I have to let even though there's a lack of faith now, I have to let the complaint process run its course first before I engage in any way, because it's quite possible and highly likely that they would use that against me.
Unless it was recorded, of course, and I'm not sure of that. So what are we to do? What can we do? Like the extended Black community, is there anything that we can do to help your situation, to help what is happening, before we go into?
I think more than anything, it's going to be a combination of things, because we are in a day and age where all they say is advocate, advocate for yourself. And then I did that, and now I am very firmly being punished for it. So it really becomes a matter of just being smart about how we do things. Every doctor's appointment I went to, I always went on my own. Have someone that goes with you, so that you just have another party to the situation. So that way you can say, yes, this other person was there. They also heard what was said. If you have an opportunity and you're going to the doctor, record your meetings. Ask the doctor. You would have to seek
permission or their consent. Their consent, yeah.
But record it, because like a lot of times I was crying. Now, granted, I got so used to crying that I could still function and carry the whole conversation on and retain the information that they gave me. But record the information, record the conversation, just let them know, you know what, it's an emotional time for me. And I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any information, because it's going to come down to how you present it. If you present it from the standpoint of, it's just been a lot of information, I want to be able to refer back to it or play it back to whoever's in your life so that they also can hear directly from the doctor, present it like that. See how they respond to that. How they respond to that will give you an indication of who they are. Some might say, yes, that's not a problem. Then you know they're
Mhm.
open. If they say no, it's okay to ask them why. Is there a reason that this is uncomfortable
Mhm.
for you? Again, it's how we present things, because as Black people, we know that we aren't granted the grace of being able to get upset about anything in public.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say do that. Also, at the same time, don't allow what happened to me to keep you from advocating for yourself. That is the key. And then if something goes wrong, be willing to take the steps necessary to make the
Yeah.
complaint. And I know that that is hard. It was definitely hard for me. It's not for the faint of heart. But a big part of why I'm taking this to the top of the mountain is because they will have to have a written record now.
Absolutely.
You will have a written record of my initial complaint, of my request for a review, and me taking it to the
Yeah.
ombudsman. So that way they're able to start collecting
Mhm.
data. Because a big problem we run into with the medical system here is that they haven't been previously collecting race based data. That's only started probably around 2021 due to
Yeah.
COVID. And so we need to start creating the data that can be used to support the distinctions that we're calling to the system when it comes to the treatment of minority group
Thank
members.
you.
Also, create a support system for yourself because it is hard,
Mhm.
it is challenging. And there are some free resources that are available. The Africa Center does have a free therapy clinic that they run
Mhm.
as well. So you're able to access some resources there. But it's really about we have to speak up. And I absolutely appreciate that you might not want to. And that's
Yeah,
okay. Take some
if
time
you
for
need
you.
to. And
Take your silence on
also,
yourself,
Lila,
write it
within the Think Meetups group, which you just joined, by the way, if you're listening and you are in the Think Meetups, Lila just joined, right? You just signed up, I think.
down.
So
Yes,
I'm sure people will reach out to you there or on the podcast. You're also on Instagram. Are you on Facebook? Yeah.
I am on
Oh,
Facebook. You can find us at Afrofax underscore
EDU.
edu. I'm most present on
Instagram.
Instagram and
Okay,
LinkedIn.
awesome. So you can reach out to her there. Within the Think meetups, people are always offering resources for mental health, therapeutic services for us in the Black community because our needs are unique, and by right they
Mhm.
should be because that's just who we are. And so people can avail themselves of those opportunities within the community as well. They do exist. Don't stay
Mhm.
and simmer in confusion or regret or depression. Let's reach out and help each other and avail
Yeah.
ourselves of what is available. So thank you. So
Mhm.
before we go, last thing I so was looking also forward to talking about podcasting with you. I think we're both enjoying it. When did you started in February of this year? Is it? Oh my
Yeah, so we
goodness.
launched at the beginning of Black
Uh-huh.
History Month. We currently have 7 episodes
Nice.
up. We release a new episode every
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday. And really, the intention with the conversation is the relationship is exactly as the name
Mm-hmm.
says. The level of relationship we have with each other comes down to the type of
Yeah.
conversation that we're having. If we're living in the land of small talk where I'm
The
asking you
weather.
about the weather, we're having water cooler conversation, how was your weekend? Just living in that light area, then that doesn't give way to a deep relationship. But if I'm talking to you about my traumas, my hopes, my fears, my aspirations, naturally that's going to create a deeper level of trust and allow us to connect on
Yeah.
that deeper
Yeah.
level. And so I really wanted to be able to create space for us to hear the stories of different minority group members because they're different and yet there's so much commonality within the experience. But because we're not talking about consistently, it's like one story here, one story there. We're not paying
Yeah.
attention. And I really want to provide a face and a voice to these stories so that people really anchor that information within themselves, internalize it, and then are able to step into their allyship
Awesome.
journey. Additionally, some people don't have diversity around them.
Yeah.
And so you have to bring emotional intelligence to the situation. If someone's never been told what they're saying or what they're doing is offensive or ignorant, they're not going to know. So you can't really just go right to getting angry with them. You need to be able to recognize that, present them with an opportunity to increase their awareness, and then see what they do
Wow.
after that. That'll tell you who they are. And then you'll have more of an opportunity to decide if you
Mm-hmm.
believe them or not.
Wow. So that thank you for what I love most. The unique thing about you is what I love the most. That okay, so most Black people grow up around other Black people. Your
Mhm.
experience is so different that it brings another
Yeah.
layer to how we are able to interface and get along. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So last
Yeah.
comment before we go, Lila, I'll take this comment from ABMA. She says, I like the way you put it. Let me put it on the screen. I like the way you put it. We are not granted the grace of getting upset. So painfully true. Even when we are polite and respectful in our approach, subconscious bias comes to play indeed. And so I guess part of that entire
Yeah.
journey, as you said, I found,
That's it
yeah,
on the
it is
head. That's what
absolutely.
happens.
But conversations and getting to know people who are outside of your circles go some way towards proper interpretation of each other's reactions. Like I've seen it. If you are accustomed to how Black people react, you're not going to just put the label that your grandparents put on it because they didn't know who we are. So it makes sense for
Yeah.
us to be able to straddle all of the different worlds and not be afraid ourselves to reach out. I think that's a big part
Hmm.
of the relationship. Well,
Yeah.
the conversation has been the relationship today, girl. Thank you so much. You are loved, not
Thank
everybody
you.
gets to say angry Black woman, in other circles where
Mhm.
you are called those kinds of names, aggressive and rude and so on. We say you're strong and independent and you have a mind that you are definitely exercising, and we honor that today, if nothing else. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, keep on
Mhm.
doing what you do. So you guys go follow The Conversation is the Relationship. Comes out every Wednesday. And I've been speaking with
Yep.
Lillah Penddah. So you go follow her, welcome her into, our circles as well. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's been an
Oh,
absolute
goodness.
pleasure. Thank you for creating an opportunity for me to be able to further share this story. And yeah, really the intention at the end of the day is for me to be able to change the world in the ways
Yeah,
I know how, because we all have that
absolutely.
power. It just comes down to whether or not we are stepping
Thank
into
you.
it. And if you're looking for a way to step into it, if you're looking for a way to increase your awareness or figuring out what allyship looks
Hmm.
to you, listen to the podcast. We have gems from all kinds of people. And the intention is also for people to be able to see themselves in the different members that we
Hmm.
speak to. So there's always an educational piece to it as
Yeah.
well. And we are not afraid to go
Thank
there.
you. Okay, you guys, this has been the Sunday interview of Basement Chronicles. So if you're on and you want something, just bear with me, Lila, while I just tell them about I have a
Yeah.
webinar coming up at 5 o'clock today. It's a busy day for me, but such a delightful day doing what you love. And so I'm just going to put
Mhm.
it on the screen if you don't mind. And it is still time to join the webinar, you guys. It's happening at 5 today, 5 p.m. MST. So you can go sign up on my website, lisamdublin.com /SWC, and you'll pop up. So there's still time to join because you see the power of speaking today. And especially as an
Mhm.
immigrant, right? So at least
Mhm.
like Lila is from Edmonton. A lot of us came into this place, right? First generation Canadians, that kind
Mhm.
of thing. And
Yeah.
it gives you that added pressure and I think even drive to communicate well and to speak up with confidence about the things that matter to you. It's very, very important that you don't get the hidden memo that you should not speak up. Like just pretend you didn't get the
Mhm.
memo, go ahead and speak. So join me for that webinar at 5 o'clock today. You can go to my website and you can sign up from there. Thank you so much for being here, Lila. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I'm looking forward to the next episode of The Conversation is the Relationship. All
Excellent.
right.
It's going to be a good one. Bye now.
Awesome.